At Spoken with Authority, we like to break down executive presence into 6 areas: stance, sound, smile, silence, sight, and setup. As individuals are returning to more in-person communication, but still doing many speaking opportunities online, we wanted to take a few minutes to explore the nuances between online and in-person communication for all 6 of these areas of executive presence. They're relevant in both situations, but it's important to understand some important distinctions. So to get us started to talk about the first S, which is stance, your physical presence, Jean, tell us a little bit about how people can make some important tweaks to online and in-person communication.
Sure. When we're in person, we know that stillness is undervalued. You can have great poise and presence by remaining still, but adding movement purposefully. So rather than pacing across a stage, moving purposefully at particular moments and then being still again for a period of time. Well, online, we have to be still in our little box. And so posture is still important, shoulders back, sitting up tall if you're seated, or using a standing desk. Still remember the wide stance because you don't want to be swaying and rocking and shifting weight in your box. But one thing that's interesting is that when we have that stillness and we're confined to our box, we still want to be dynamic and have some movement. And so one way to add that is with some hand gestures. And so the thing that you have to remember is you want to gesture close to you. So if you want to say, our profits went up this much and we're moving to the left on this issue, you don't want to be doing motions like this where your hands become gigantic in the box. So yes, you're in a box, but you can add some hand gestures from time to time to add some dynamism.
Thanks, Jean. Great tips on stance. One thing to remember in a hybrid situation is to be aware of where you can stand in the physical space for people online to see you. You don't want to go outside of where the camera can pick you up. So using a little painter's tape on the floor to mark out your speaking area can be helpful. Now, to give us a sense of how you could work on your vocal presence and the nuance in between online and in person, let's hear from our coach, Michelle.
All right. Thank you very much, Christine. When we're in the in-person setting, we often give the tip, speak as if you're trying to make your sound reach the back of the room. Now, you still can do that, but there's some other technological supports that we can use to enhance vocal presence. One being a dB meter. Just go into your app store, Google dB meter, and you want to maintain a vocal presence at about 60 dB. So you can just take your phone, you can have it during meetings. Great place to practice. Prop it up so you can see it and monitor it, and you can monitor your loudness that way. We can still work on vocal variation. And Christine, you know, one of my favorite exercises is to just do this. Ah, wherever you land on that ah, that is what's called our optimal pitch. That's where we have that low, robust sound that has you sounding authoritative. Those are my tips. Thank you so much, Christine.
Thanks, Michelle. Yeah, great advice. And just remember that when you are online or in person, use the technology, whether it's a microphone in person, whether it's a wired microphone online. Absolutely use it to your advantage. And I think that online is a real equalizer for people who are a little more soft-spoken, because it is easier to elevate your vocal presence by just using a really high quality microphone. So if you are a little quieter, just invest a little bit more in a nice microphone setup for your online meetings. Christina, tell us about energy, enthusiasm, and smile and the differences in nuance between doing that online and in person.
Yes, so thank you. One of the things that's really nice about talking to someone is seeing their reaction. And it starts with your face. It starts with our face. And the delicate balance between not having a fake plastered smile on you the entire time as you're talking through each topic. You want to be taken seriously. You want to be sensitive to serious topics that you're referring to. But at the same time, you really do want to have as positive and pleasant of a demeanor as possible. So one of the things that I share with my clients is think about before you speak what you're going to be talking about. If it's a rather light topic, this is easy because you can think about those enthusiastic points that you're most excited about and then incorporate a smile into that very naturally instead of looking like it's plastered on your face. But if you're talking about a more technical or more serious or formal topic, one of the things that you can do is speak with your eyes. So if you're really talking about something where you want people to be engaged, but again, be as positive as possible, use your eye movements, use your focus. It could be a squint, it could be a widen, it could be a furrow of the brow, but at the same time, you can incorporate it with things like a smile and pairing that with the intonations of your voice so that people know, hey, this is meant to be a pleasant experience and I want you to join in on that. So that's a big tip that I use to balance being natural and being positive at the same time.
Thanks, Christina. It's really great to see you before you had to hop off. So thanks for contributing to those nuances in smile. Another thing that I would add is that when you are online, it really does suck the energy out of you. And it takes even more energy to come across to your listeners as enthusiastic, like Christina mentioned, maybe with your eyes, maybe it is with an actual smile, but it is important to work on elevating that energy for online, especially after a long week or a long day. You might want to stand up at a standing desk or use an ironing board and some books or a computer stand to get you standing so you can bring that energy to your whole body, including your face, for online communication. And when you're online, it's sometimes easy to forget when you're listening and your camera is on. So you might have a little post-it note up near your camera lens with a smiley face just to remind yourself, oh yeah, that's right, I'm listening. I want to show that I'm attentive, and just have the brightness of your face rather than what we like to sometimes call resting grumpy face. All right. I was going to cover the issue of silence, the ability to pause. And whether you're online or in person, many people from the US and Western business contexts are uncomfortable pausing and having that moment of silence after they're asked a question and they're processing, as they're transitioning thoughts, even between a sentence or where a comma would go in communication. We oftentimes fill those places that should be silent with ums and ahs and likes and you knows. And that happens both online and in person. We did find early on in the pandemic that there were more ums and ahs for people online because they had mental bandwidth that was focusing on the video conference platform. And so more ums and ahs started to get introduced into the communication. I think as people are more comfortable, that's a little bit reduced, but now we're seeing it as folks go back in person because it's a little bit less comfortable for some individuals. So if you are switching format, just know that that can be something to be aware of. And then when you are silent online, it's important to give an announcement because people can't necessarily read your nonverbals as well. And they can be confused if there's a silence and they don't know why. So if you want people to ask questions in the chat box or to do something or to respond and unmute themselves, just know that you should again make an announcement that you are going to have a longer pause. You might include that in the chat box or a note on your slides if appropriate. And if you are online, it is helpful to really count in your head when you have a pause to get responses from folks, for them to ask questions or to respond, because it takes a while to unmute, takes a while to write in the chat box, and you can oftentimes skip over that when you're uncomfortable with silence. So a couple of things to think about for the online communication that you're doing. All right, in terms of sight, Biren, how do we transition from online to in person? What are the nuances? How do we do it well in both formats?
I think thinking about sight as a continuum, where one side of the continuum is your needs and one side of the continuum is the audience's needs. And I would say when you're in person, we're probably sitting somewhere in the middle. The presentation is eye contact to make sure that the audience feels attended to and that they feel that this is engaging, but it's also eye contact for you to get feedback, to see how they're reacting and connecting with your material. When you go online, we all know that when there's that little camera, that you have to make a choice. And you actually don't get that both ways. And I think there's a lot of people that probably default to, I want to see what they're doing. And when you do that, it probably, you're losing that engagement. So I would say we're forced into a choice. And when forced into that choice, I would say when particularly in high stakes situations, perhaps if you're interviewing for a job, that you should default to the camera so that the person on the other end feels as if they're being connected with. And so that's sometimes, if you know the audience very well, maybe this is your weekly team meeting, there can be a little bit more of I'm looking at my screen, I'm looking off at my second screen, but really in those high stakes situations, that continuum, I would skew more towards the needs of the audience. The real wrench in all of this is when we go hybrid and you start thinking about where do I look? Christine already mentioned maybe marking out an area where you can stand and make sure that you can still be seen by your audience online and still be seen by the audience that's in that room. I think it just takes a lot of intentionality when you've got that hybrid experience of maybe delivering, larger chunks to just the online part, just to kind of re-engage with them, or then will still be seen by the group that's online, but then be able to make eye contact with the folks in the room and not feel as if your head is just on an absolute swivel and you're just trying to connect with both groups all the time. It takes some of that intentionality and just making sure that, you might have to lose eye contact with one group for one period of time, but you know that you've got it planned that you're going to re-engage. And then also kind of going back to some of the things that Christine just mentioned about silence and waiting for questions, building in time to kind of allow them to follow up to say, I missed that, I didn't see that slide, or can you repeat that one thing in case there was somehow a missed engagement with your eye contact, or just they couldn't even hear you. So it's a continuum. It's always shifting, but I think the technology actually forces us into some choices and into some decisions where we have to be very intentional with what we're doing, depending on our needs and how high the stakes are.
I love that, being intentional. It's a great through line in what you said and what all of us have been saying. I would say one other thing about sight is that I think there's a myth that when you are online, you don't have to practice your comments, rehearse them from notes or an outline, and that you can simply script everything and read it because you're not in person and no one will know. That is not actually true. People can tell when you're online and you've scripted something and your eyes are just a little lower and you're reading it off your Word document on your computer. You do have to do the same amount of preparation and rehearsal so that you can be fluid with your material. You can be confident. You can look at the green dot in your camera if you're online. You can have that intentionality between online audience members and in person for hybrid situations. And just like you would in person, you really do want to look up from your notes regularly so you can give that experience of eye contact. So remember, the distinction between online and in person is not that you can just script and read online. It's not true. And we've seen a lot of people try it. It doesn't end well. So David, I think one of the biggest differences between online and in-person communication is just the amount of effort that you need to put into a successful setup for computer-mediated communication. And we have been talking a lot about the elements of executive presence. And one thing we haven't stated directly is that it is really important to turn on your camera whenever possible, whenever you're speaking, definitely, and as much as possible when you're listening. But tell us, when we do have that camera on, what should we be doing to make sure that our setup is professional and enhancing our executive presence?
Christine, I'm so glad I got this question because, setups are kind of my thing. I really like setups. And in this new hybrid world, I think you have to be prepared to do it when you're in a Zoom environment. And then as we transition back to work, when you're in a Zoom environment at your house or at your office, these days, if you do work in both places, you probably need a space in both places where you feel comfortable and you feel empowered to be a great presenter. I love putting personal things behind me because they help me manage my nerves when I'm speaking. I have an obnoxious number of pictures of my wife and I together on my shelves, things that we purchased, a plant, normally a flower, an orchid is behind me. Not everybody has that luxury. And if you don't have that luxury, a green screen can be a very good solution. Just Google green screen and remember this. Every time you saw someone with a background in Zoom and it's getting kind of wonky around their basic silhouette, green screens help correct for that. If you want a more sustained background, think of things that you normally might not come to mind when backgrounds come up. Kitchens and staircases both make excellent backgrounds. Something we forget, though, is regardless of your background, everyone needs a microphone to help enhance their Zoom presence, and you need some form of a light. For many of us, you get that Zoom call when you weren't expecting that Zoom call and you're not in one of your spaces. So a portable light like a Lume Cube can make a big difference. And for those of us with darker skin, I feel like those AirPods stand out like a sore thumb. So you can get earbuds that have a really good built-in microphone that are discreet when you put them in your ear. And hopefully mine doesn't turn on automatically. Fortunately, it didn't. As you transition to speaking in person, something that's easy to forget is, whereas you control your Zoom environment and your background and your microphone and your lighting, you do not control the areas where you speak in person. So if you know you're going to be giving a presentation in person, ask the person who's organizing, hey, what's the setup like? Am I going to be standing behind something? Am I going to be able to show my slides? Then get there early to realize all the misinformation that was communicated to you. You may be standing 20 feet away from your computer and you didn't bring your clicker. You need to know these things, so get there early. And the last piece of advice is, as we're working through our nerves that come along with speaking back in person, sometimes getting in the room early enough to set up and then mingle with the people who are showing up helps humanize your audience in a way where you're not trying to go from 0 to 60 the instant you stand up and start talking. You get to warm up by interacting with people. You get to remind yourself that, yes, these partners, these clients, they're human just like me, and I'm going to do an awesome job once I get up and start my presentation.
Thanks, David. I do think that, like I mentioned for Bjorn, there's an idea that there's a difference between online and in person when there really isn't. And I think that that applies to setup as well. When people are more casual and or even disheveled when they're online versus when they would go into an office. And it's important to remember that you should maybe not wear the same formality of clothes, but to think about wearing something with a collar, something that is nice and crisp, making sure that you are doing the kind of grooming with your hair and your makeup if you wear it, and haircuts and things of that nature, even if you are fully remote, that you would if you were going in for an in-person meeting or event. It is really important to your executive presence that you keep those things in mind. We have seen some coaching clients who got into some bad habits, and it's important to make sure that as we continue forward, we want online to be part of the mix because it is convenient. It does save a lot of time and frustration and environmental impacts on travel, and it does help improve inclusion. Just it's a lot easier for a lot of individuals to hop online than it is to go in person. So for us to maintain that element of our communication mix, making sure that we bring our best selves and our most elevated presence with all of the 6 S's is a really important thing to do. So today we talked about stance, sound, smile, silence, sight, and setup. And I want to thank my team of coaches from Spoken with Authority for sharing those nuances and distinctions as we are working on online, in-person, and hybrid communication.